Now, hello, I'm Robert Ogilvy, Executive Strategist and EQ Coach. Glad you could join me today. Okay, so today's question, today's issue, when isn't executive coaching for you? Or you think of it as a counterpoint of like, oh, I think I'm ready for coaching. I want some coaching. Okay, well, here are things that you might be doing. Honestly, you're probably doing, which not just are getting in your own way, but they would sabotage the whole coaching process and they would basically ensure you get no ROI out of it. So I'll just lay out what the 3 points are. It's all tactics, but there's no real fundamental change or development going on. That's a really bad sign. When the person doesn't want to take, when the client doesn't want to take any blame or personal responsibility, in this context, I'm going to say shared responsibility. And so, as you can imagine, this is a lot about relationships. So, of course, we'll break that down. And lastly, they can't admit failure or real gaps. And what I mean by that is more of a solo sense of they can't admit failure. So less of a shared end of that. Okay, so let me go through these. First off, and maybe actually the most straightforward, when it's all tactics but no real change, what coaching feels like is it's fast, just give it to me now, just give me the right answer. Training might do that. There are good training programs which can teach you this or that technique, or a bunch of little things you can use. But that is really not coaching. That is not development focus, right? So this is maybe a good point to underscore. Why do people get involved in managerial or executive coaching, right? So as they go up the food chain, they need to become more generalist. They can manage lots of things, and that's part of where their business acumen comes in, right? So it's not about them being a technical expert, even though it will often involve learning this or that particular technique, right? So the whole point about training soft skills or training, business strategy acumen is that you want these models that can apply in lots of places, and that's actually in the way you work with others and the way you're thinking about more complex problems. That's challenging you to think and operate better, to conduct yourself better, to be more self-aware of not just what you're intending or how you're approaching planning, but how you're interfacing with others and how effective that is, right? So if someone just wants a lot of little band-aids and kind of quick tactical fixes, a lot of shortcuts, it shows that they're really not interested in any kind of developmental change, right? In my mind, I would kind of compare it to, someone's kind of deciding, well, yes or no, should I engage in some, $8,000, $15,000 program, something like that, and they're like, no, I prefer to do the $200 online MOOC version. That's the same, right? No, that's not the same at all. But if that's the level you're at right now, go ahead. But that's not real development, right? There's a lot more we could get into around that. I'm also going to briefly touch on this point that these are often people which are satisfied with imbalance. You're going to hear me nerd out for a second here. So in the Myers-Briggs end of things, ENTJs and ESTJs, because they're so efficiency-oriented and commanding, if you look at their career, their pay band across decades, they jump right up in their 20s and 30s, but then it caps off because they stop learning and developing, right? So these are people they might be efficiency and productivity focused, but they're not really into learning and development, and long term they can have real problems interfacing with others, right? They can be control freaks straight out. And that's not just a way they're dealing with others, that's a personal balance kind of issue. So, the notion of talking to someone which is obsessed with productivity and kind of a control freak, they have personal balance issues in their own life, right? And that shows that they actually don't really want to get better in any sense, right? And so what it feels like with them is like, give me some productivity tips. And it's like, do you need productivity tips, or do you need a working with others tips and thinking deeply tips and practice doing this and training about how other people actually see you, right? Anyway, so that's why the whole, give me some tactics. It's like, okay, well, this isn't real development. Sorry, I fucked on that too long. Second point, and this maybe gets more to that. When they want to take zero blame, zero responsibility for what's going on, particularly in kind of shared relationships. And so everything has this kind of win-lose tone, who's to blame, and it could never be me. And then you kind of imagine, smash some kind of power and authority issues in there, and it's like, everything is asymmetric, right? These are the kind of people which and sorry, I don't want to point them with too black of a brush here, but if you're not able to take responsibility, you're also not able to think about how you might improve, or you're not really interested and motivated that it could be your realm to improve it, and there might be things you could work on that could actually make things better, right? And this is really the soft skill side of EQ, right? So in the 6 seconds model, which is 8 competencies, this is a lot where we're going to see things like, well, how's your navigate emotions? Maybe how's your consequential thinking, but particularly a lot of like, how's your optimism? How's your empathy? Are other people feeling your noble purpose? We know actually when we look at managers that they basically all need, and I'm trying to remember the particular ones, but noble purpose always helps, and exercising optimism always helps. And then I think the difference is when you're an earlier manager, you need, I think it's a bit more empathy and a bit more navigate emotions to kind of adapt to problems. And then as you become more of the executive end of things, you need more of the intrinsic motivation, because in that kind of curious strat space, you need to be able to carve stuff out of nothing, right? And so these are great examples of realms where shared responsibility, is it my fault, is it your fault, what are we doing, how's our process looking like, becomes really important. And also ever more so as we're doing more innovative, more shared, more intangible intellectual work, right? So someone that can't take responsibility for how others are feeling about them, or how the team is kind of operating, that they don't have that kind of team enabling mindset, yeah, that's a big gap, right? It shows this win-lose mentality. The briefest way I could describe it is that if you think of the tribal leadership model of 5 levels, it's very emblematic of level 3, which is I win, you lose. As long as I put in more effort and more of this, and I'm more heroic than you are, then like I win. And it's like, that is not a team win, that is not an impactful win. That's a selfish win, straight up. Anyway. So that's the second really bad sign. Third bad sign is that they can't admit failure or reveal gaps, and I mean this now in a purely solo sense. And so this is more dealing with their own blind spots, that they actually lack a lot of the self-awareness facets. So again, the 2 self-awareness facets of EQ are your emotional fluency, how well you can spot and describe all the nuanced flavors of what you're experiencing and thinking, and what's going on inside you. And then the other part of it is pattern recognition, which is really more about knowing your needs, knowing your strengths, knowing long-term, kind of your habits and how you tend to operate and not operate, and kind of zones that will kind of help bring out your best, right? If you're lacking that stuff, it becomes really hard to optimize anything. And this is also kind of the heart, the initial gateway, which allows you to become not just more self-aware, but more self-regulated, which becomes a gateway to using all these other EQ skills, right? So if someone is lacking those initial self-awareness gaps, it's a big problem. It's not to say that it can't be built up, but if they're not interested in doing that, the question is, okay, so what do you think this work is, right? At a kind of deeper, like, what are the real factors going on? In that way, like, people experience that. I like both the second and third points. You could kind of detect them with 360 feedbacks. Though the difference, might be for the person that doesn't want to take any responsibility, it might feel more like the control freak kind of tendency, the impulse to want to control everything, and this kind of power asymmetry. Whereas for the blind spot end of things, what it can be perceived more like is that for whatever they're thinking or whatever big plans they have, they don't come off as they seem to see themselves. So there's this small delta, maybe there's this large delta between how they're viewing themselves and how others are, right? You could even really more to the point say how they're viewing themselves and the reality of what they are, right? These are really some of the crunchier points that coaches are great for helping you explore, right? Because they're trying to get you to understand, what are you great at, what are the areas that motivate you. I will say this is also really part of the long-term dance of coaching, which is that, short-term you're there for some goal you're trying to achieve and do better, but long-term the real dance is that you're not just developing and becoming better, but there's a balance side of it. There's all the things that you're not really focused on. Again, the wheel of life, the kind of balance wheel, balance coaching exercise is a great way to do this, right? You do the wheel, you have 8, 10, however many slices, you give kind of a 1 to 10 score from. Everyone's always really proud of their 8, 9s, 10s. They're not so proud of their 5s, and they're often not even noticing their 1s, 2s, and 3s, right? And again, this is a wheel. This is the experience of life that you are riding on. Can your 1 or 2 8s really compensate for your half a dozen, 3s and 5s? And the answer is no, they can't, right? So again, you're not ready for coaching if all you want is tactics, you can't take responsibility, and you can't personally be interested in revealing your gaps, spotting those blind spots. So I hope you guys learned something. Again, if coaching, if this sounds like you, start to do your own self-awareness work and get ready for it. Or hopefully it does sound like you and you're like, yeah, let's keep developing myself, in which case, keep doing it. All right, I'm Robert Ogilvy, Executive Strategist and EQ Coach. See you guys soon.